All right. We are on page 135 if you have the form, the book, the digital thing. And we're talking about, we're continuing. This is, what is it? This is the seventh, isn't it, son? It is the seventh because we had two fives. And that's what I was back there at the beginning of the service doing, was fixing it, because we had two fives and then this would have been six, but no, it's seven. I got a pencil here. Hey, check that out. That's where I left that. All right. So this is the seventh. And so we're going through Theology Proper. Again, this is the Landmarks of Baptist Doctrine. And Landmarks of Baptist Doctrine, we're dealing with, like I read earlier, those major topics: the Bible and God, Christ and the Holy Spirit, man, sin, salvation, church, the church, angels, and last things. So we talked about, we spent a whole three credit hour subject on, or class on, Bibliology, or the study of the Bible. And now we're looking at the study of God, or Theology Proper. And so as we look at the study of God, or Theology Proper, so far we gave kind of an introduction to the concept of God, looking at it from a logical perspective. We looked at true and false concepts of God. Then we looked at the existence of God. A lot of these things, some people say, well, why do we need to know any of that? Well, because oftentimes when you're talking to people about, you want to tell them about Jesus, you want to tell them about salvation, in our world today, you really kind of have to start at a more basic level, because so many people try to reject that there's even a God. And so you've got to help them to understand that, based upon the logic that God put in them, that they cannot deny that there's a God. And so we deal with developing the understanding of the existence of God by reason, by revelation, and by reality. And we did that and finished that last week. And then this week we begin on lecture 3, which is the essence of God. Excuse me. And it's going to be a while in lecture 3. And then when we get to lecture 4, we will be looking at the natural, or the nature of God, his natural attributes, and then we'll look at his moral attributes as well. And I believe that is it for this particular section. No, we're going to talk about the sovereignty of God. I think I may have skipped. His natural and moral attributes, then his sovereignty, because that's a commonly misunderstood subject. And then let's see. And then the names and titles of God. And I believe that's the last. There's 7 lectures in this study. It should take us roughly about 6 months, maybe a little more. So here we are on page 135, the essence of God. So by essence, we mean the substance. Okay. Remember in Hebrews chapter 11, verse number 1, it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So we talk about the essence of God. We're talking about his substance, or his being. This is, let's see here. This, in fact, is incomprehensible. We really can't fully understand it, because God is different from anything that we can grasp with our finite or limited minds. Consequently, the scriptures never discuss the being or essence of God apart from his attributes, inasmuch as God is what he reveals himself to be. Okay, so as we study through this is just to give us a simple understanding of what God is. And as we study the Word of God, it tells us who God is. And by studying his word and finding out who he is, we also can derive from that what he is. But we're kind of looking at it from the other perspective. We're going to look first at what he is based upon who he is, and then look more deeply on who he is. Does that make sense? It's too early to talk that fast, isn't it? All right. So first of all, the essence of God revealed in John 4:24. And by the way, this is a somewhat of a long lecture, and it's about 10 pages, but we're going to probably touch on maybe a page and a half each lesson. So, first of all, the essence of God revealed in John 4:24. Y'all remember what that says? It's written right in the book, or you can read it right out of your Bible. It says, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. This this gives us three basic things that we need to note about God's nature and essence, okay, or nature or essence. First of all, that there is life, that God has life, that he is life. Secondly, that there is spirituality. And the third, there is personality. Okay, those three basic things are there. And so, we obviously, in order to worship God, he must be alive. In order to, and I'm kind of spending too much time right now. We're going to delve into it more deeply, anyways. Then we have the aspect of spirituality and the aspect of personality. So, without trying to explain it before we get into it, let's jump in. So it says, first of all, that God is, and this is God is life. Okay, this is point number A under section 1 here, the essence of God revealed in John 4:24. So first of all, again, John 4:24 says, God is. Before he goes into God is a spirit, we see God is, and that is, it's important to note that it's not that God was or God will be, but that God is. Okay, and this concept of being here. Okay, again, when we're talking about essence, we're talking about being, right? And God is the only one who just is. Right? There's no he. Of course, we have in the Revelation. He says, "What? I am He which was and which is to come." Right, and so outside of the bounds of time, he simply is. And so here we see that he is. So, question: what is life? Crickets. God is life. Okay. So he's pointing out here again that there's an incomprehensible aspect to life. Okay. We just take life for granted, right? And scientifically, we define life as what? Stuff that we've got. There's basically, I think there's 5 basic scientific requirements in order for something to be considered living, and that is that it has a beginning and an end. Okay, but those aren't both. Let's see here. I'm trying to think of the five points of life. Somebody Google it real quick here, and I'll try to remember the ones. What's that? It has to have reproduction of some sort, reproduce itself. Okay. Now God doesn't fit in this in this stuff because he has no beginning and no end. But living things, as we define them scientifically, there has to be reproduction. There has to be use of energy, right? So what do? We drink water, we eat food, we take in calories, and our bodies utilize that energy. And then we have waste, right? As well. And so there's use of energy, waste. What, did you find it? No? Okay. Nobody's looking. The 5 characteristics of life, scientifically.
Well, there's got to be a God, because to me, that tree just didn't pop out from nothing.
Right. Well, it had to have an originator, right? 8? And they added some since I was in school. In biology, okay. List them. I'm gonna repeat you so that people can hear. What's that now? Cellular organization, reproduction, metabolism. What? What? Homeostasis? Is that what you said? I think it's interesting that they've changed it to 8, because 8, yeah, that's a cyclic number. Heredity, response to stimuli. Okay, yeah. Growth and development, is that what you said? Adaptation through evolution. Wow. They added that one. Actually, I think that one was there when I was in school. 7. That's heredity. Okay. So the concept there is to have some sort of organization, response to stimuli, reproduction, and metabolism, right? The use of energy. You found 5? Okay. Obtain, use energy, reproduce, respond to environment, adapt to that environment, right? That was 4, wasn't it? That was 5. Reproduction, respond to environment. Well, it kind of is 4 because respond to environment, and then 5 is adapt. Right, which is responding to the environment, right? Okay. So, but when we try to define life, that's what. So, what fits in that category? No. I mean, what stuff fits in that category as living? Do plants fit in that category? Yes, plants fit in that category. Animals and people fit in that category, right? A lot of, when we talk about living things, right? We have. You didn't bump the slider, did you? No, him. The sound just all of a sudden, that might have just been my ears opening up, but sound just all of a sudden got a little louder. But anyway, so yeah, we've defined life based upon our experience of life, right? That's the problem. We're slightly flawed because we don't experience what God experiences. But life is really, it's an intuition. It's something that we can describe it, but we really can't technically define it. We can say, when we try to what we're doing is we're describing characteristics of life, right? But life itself, where does that come from? We don't know. Of course, it takes us back to the essence of God. Life comes from God, and God is life. Other scriptures declare God is life. In John chapter 5 and verse 26, it says, "For the Father hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life in himself." In Jeremiah 10, verse number 10, the first part of that verse, it says, "But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and an everlasting King." Again, we have the living God. In Acts chapter 14, verse number 15, we have a part of a conversation here. It says, "And saying, Sirs, why do you these things? We also are men of like passions with you, and preach unto you that ye should turn from these vanities unto the living God, which made heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein." Y'all remember who's being spoken, what the conversation was here? They came and tried to worship them. This was Paul and was it Paul and Barnabas or Paul and Silas? I think it was Paul and Barnabas. Yes. So they come and try to worship them and say, "Whoa, why are you doing this? We're men of like passions. You know, we're just like you. And we're preaching unto you that you should turn from these vanities. In other words, turn from trying to serve these lifeless gods. They had statues that they had worshipped and things. And so he says, turn from these vanities unto the living God, the one who actually lives and from whom all life comes. The one who made heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein. Number 3 here, comparative examples showing God to be living. So we looked at what is life. Again, God is life. We looked at other scriptures declaring that God is life. And then we continue here, comparative examples showing God to be living. God is often compared to the false gods by the fact that he is a living God. And in Jeremiah 10:10 through verse 16, we have this. We'll just turn there right quickly. Jeremiah chapter 10. And verse number 10, it says, as we started to read earlier already, but the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and an everlasting King. At his wrath, the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide his indignation. Thus shall they say unto them, the gods, small g, that have not made the heavens and the earth, even they shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. Verse number 12. He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion. When he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. Every man is brutish in his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them. Verse number 15. They are vanity, and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation, they shall perish. And then verse number 16 says, the portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. You see, differentiated or compared to the false gods, we see the God, the living God who made all things. Also in Habakkuk, just a few miles to your right, or however you want to slice it, toward the right before you get to the New Testament. See, Habakkuk chapter number 2, verses 18 through 20 says, what profiteth the graven image that the maker thereof hath graven it, the molten image, and the teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein, to make dumb idols. Y'all know what he's talking about. He's not just talking about these stupid idols. The dumb idols, in other words, these are idols that can't speak. You know, they have gods that don't talk to them. And he's kind of saying, hey, what good is that? What good is it to have a God that doesn't talk to you? What good is it to have a graven image that can't speak to you? Woe unto them that saith to the wood, that idol, right? Awake! To the dumb stone, arise! It shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. There's no life there. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. You see, in comparison, we find that God in fact, is not to be compared to idols because he doesn't even fit in the same class. An idol is nothing more than something sculpted by a man's hands. But God is the one who, with his hand, sculpted man. And so, so we look, first of all, that God is life, that he is life, and in him is life, right? Letter B, or the second one here, is God is spirit. And this is on page 136 if you're following along there. God is spirit. And this is versus this concept of God being spirit is in opposition to, or rather this other concept is in opposition to it. God is spirit versus materialism. Anybody ever heard of materialism? It's the belief that the only thing that is what you can see and feel and touch and observe with your senses. That's materialism. And so we're putting those against each other. The thought, the truth that God is spirit versus the thought process that there's nothing more than the material world. So the context of John 4, verse 24 is important in the understanding of this scripture. The woman of Samaria was actually asking Jesus where God was to be found, Jerusalem or Gerizim. You all know what we're talking about. She said, you guys remember the woman at the well? Anybody that's been paying attention Sunday nights, we've been with the woman at the well for 6 weeks. Tonight, Lord willing, we won't be there because Brother Philip's going to preach tonight, and I'm going to just sit down there and relax and watch him preach and enjoy hearing some preaching instead of being the one to preach. So anyways, but if you paid attention the last 6 weeks about the woman at the well, we've talked about quite a bit there. But one of the things that's mentioned, in fact, we could spend a year just looking at that interaction with Jesus and the woman at the well, and talking about all the little details, and we could talk about the background of this argument that we're about to spend a little time talking about, where it talks about this point in verse number 24. Again, she says, where are we, you guys say we're supposed to worship over here. Our fathers said here. Well, what are we supposed to do here? Right. And she's asking again, the concept is that what she's asking is, where do we find God? Where do we go to meet with God? Where can we worship God? Where can we meet him? In terms of, where's God's presence? Where is he going to be? Do we go up into these mountains here in Gerizim, or do we go down or up to Jerusalem to worship God? And his answer is that God is not limited. He is a spirit. He's not limited to a specific location. It's not that, God's got to go here or there. In fact, when God allowed Solomon to build a house for him, he said that the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, right? In fact, later on in the book of Acts, referring back to that, he says that the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, right? But God made him a house there, or God allowed him a house to be made there by Solomon. A little thing to note here, he's got says the article A is omitted in several modern quote unquote versions of the Bible. For more on the versions and stuff, we spent an entire 32-week series on, or 32-hour series, whatever, a 3 credit hour course on. It might have only been 2 credit hours. I don't remember now. Anyways, we spent a whole course on Bibliology just before this. So if you want to go get that information, it's all on YouTube. You can catch it there. It's Landmarks of Baptist Doctrine, Bibliology. And then I can get you the materials as well. But this distinction, these modern versions here, were the RSV, the NASB, the NIV, and the New King James. This distinction, however, is important, and the rendering in the Authorized King James Version is correct. God is a spirit, in distinction to all other spirits, okay? Not that he is just spirit. In the RSV, NASV, the NIV, and the NKJV it all says that God is spirit, as opposed to God is a spirit. Again, another side note. I had a little note here. I'm going to skip that. Anyways, so yeah, the article there, the word "a," is important. It's kind of like the the Russellite Bible adds the word "a" in John chapter 1. Y'all remember John chapter 1, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Well, the authorized version, our Bible says the Word was God. Well, the Russellite translation, called the New World Translation, it says the Word was a God. They add the article there, and then in other places they pull the article out. Here, in this, as an example. I don't know. Yeah, probably. But you'll find, if you look deeply into the translation, the translators, the method, the underlying text, the fact that none of the translators knew the original languages. You look at the whole mess of that particular translation, and you see exactly why they made the translation, because they used the King James before and they just denied various parts of the King James because they disagreed with it. And then all of a sudden they have their own version, and all those parts that they disagree with the translation are now all the parts where they disagree with the King James are now magically gone in their new version, and now supports their doctrine. Well, what's going on here? I think we would do well to let the Bible change us instead of us changing the Bible. So, number one here, under God is spirit, or God is a spirit. What does this involve? So, spirit in contrast to matter, right? Metaphysical in contrast with physical. This passage of Scripture teaches, first of all, that God is incorporeal. Incorporeal. There we go. In other words, without body. Okay, and we're talking about the Father here. So he says in Luke chapter 24, verse 39, "Behold, my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me to have." This is Jesus. Okay. Again, when we're talking about God, we're talking about God the Father. We recognize that he was manifest in the flesh through Jesus Christ, became flesh and dwelt among us. Again, that doesn't make him any less God. However, we recognize God's essence, his eternal essence, again, is spirit. Okay. And then we have the flesh that he became for our sakes, for sin. You can go all the way back to Hebrews chapter 2, where we preached on that about 5 weeks ago, or no, about 10 or 12 weeks ago. Hebrews chapter 2, you can watch that message and catch the importance of Christ's humanity. But the next thing here, letter B, is that God is invisible, or not seen. Who is, and in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, there, part of the verse, it says, "Who is the image of the invisible God?" That's talking about Jesus being the image of the invisible God. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 17, it says, "Now unto the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen." We could also look at Romans 1:20 and 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 16, we're going to skip over that for sake of time. We're going to try to get through this letter B today, and then we'll talk about God being a person next week, Lord willing. But here we have, again, that he is unlimited, letter C. So under this concept of God being a spirit, it involves him being without body, invisible, and unlimited, or not contained. Psalm chapter 139, verse 7 says, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence?" You can't get away from his presence or his spirit, because it's not bound. He's not bound. He's not stuck in one place. And then we have, furthermore, in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold." Hey, this is that passage I was referring to earlier. I do that all the time. I'll preempt stuff that I'm about to cover. I'll say, "You remember when this happened?" And then and then we bring it up. I just, my brain works ahead a little bit sometimes. So he says, will God indeed dwell on earth? Behold, the heaven and heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have builded thee? This is Solomon speaking here. So, first of all, God being spirit involves, as we said, three things: without body, without sight, not that he doesn't have sight, but we can't see him, and unlimited, without limit, without limitations. Number two here, about God being a spirit, is we look at some difficulties that sometimes people have some difficulties, and they say, "Well, how's that work?" So we'll look at some of those explained. It says, some would see apparent inconsistencies in the above explanation of God as a spirit. First of all, a number of of references to God in the Bible ascribe to him feet. And you can look at some examples of, you have Hebrews 1:10, then fingers. Psalms, or the book of Psalms, the 8th Psalm, verse number 3, eyes. In 2 Chronicles 16:9, and then also in Isaiah 59, verse 1. Just as you look through there, you see, wait a minute, God has feet and fingers and eyes and hands. Numbers 11, verse number 23 talks about that. He talks about delivering Israel out of Egypt with a outstretched arm, right? And he's got arms there that are mentioned. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 27, and so on and so on. So then how can we say that he is without a body, or that hard to pronounce word, incorporeal? So here's the answer. Such expressions of God are, y'all ever hear this before? Anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic. In other words, it means that God represents himself in human terms for our benefit. So when he talks about, in fact, there's sometimes where he represents himself in other ways that we recognize for our benefit as well, right? When he talks about comfort, and he says that he'll cover us with his wings. That's different than I'll hold you in my arm, right? You think about God covering you. We're watching our little chickens in the brooder, the little chicks, and they're starting to get the wings, or the feathers on their wings, right? And they got this thing that they do. They take their foot and they push their wing down like that. They like stretch their wing out, and it pushes it out, and the wing just feathers out like that, and it looks kind of cool. But when I see that, it reminds me about God covering me with the feathers of his wing, right? Now, does that mean that God's got feathers, that he's got wings and feathers and stuff? That's not an anthropomorphic statement. That's more of a what's that? No. It's a Bible statement, but I can't think of the word. But it's basically utilizing other aspects of his creation to help us to understand who he is and to give us that comfort, right? Because when I think of God covering me with his wing and covering me in the shelter of his wings, it's not just that his hand is over me or his arm, it's that I am completely covered. I'm sheltered there, right? And so, anyway, so he does this for our benefit. It's the only way that we can really think of him, right? Man is what? We're selfish, right? So we just happen to think from our own perspective. That's how we think. Everything that we figure and try to figure out is from our own perspective. You think about so many different things that are not human, that we ascribe human things to them, right? What do we talk about when we look back at the clock? What are we looking at? We're looking at the face of the clock, right? The clock doesn't have a face. Where's its nose? we use the, okay, we can get technical, but no, we use our terms, right? We do talk about the clock's hands. See, we have hands on our arms. The clock has hands on its face, right? But we use those kind of terms, right? We use male and female terms when talking about mechanics and electricity and all of those kind of things, and there's all these different things that we use in life to describe things because that's how we are, right? And then God knows how we are, and so therefore describes himself in a way that we can understand, and he does that for our benefit. Letter B here, talking about some of these difficulties. Other references tell us God was seen of men, yet John chapter 1 verse 18 says that no man can see God. How does that work? Well, he gives the answer here. A spirit can be manifested in visible form. That is, remember the dove at Jesus' baptism? And then we see other theophanies. You all know what a theophany is, right? And then some people use the word epiphany, is where God manifests himself to you, or show you see God, or you see a manifestation of God. It is the essence of God that we cannot see. Okay, we can see a manifestation of God when he manifests himself, right? When God said to Moses, all right, you're going to go up here on the side of the mountain, and I'm going to stick you in the cleft of the rock. So I'm going to cover you with my hand, and I'm going to pass by, and you'll see my back parts. It's like, what? I mean, what do you see when you see God pass by and you see the back parts or whatever? You don't see his essence, right? Because he said no man can see God and live. But you see what he allows to be manifested to you. You see a manifestation of him, but not his essence. Morning. So it says, what does this mean? John chapter 4, verse 24 means that God is not apprehended through our senses, as charismatic practice seeks to do, but he is apprehended rather, or connected to, by our spirit. Okay, so we don't contact God through the physical, but rather through the spiritual. That's how we connect with God. We don't connect to him through physical means, by bowing down to some physical thing. We connect to him through spiritual means. Yes, we may bow. We may come up to the altar here and we may bow. When you come up to the altar, who comes to the altar to pray to the altar? Does anybody come up here to pray to this box here? No, we don't come up here to pray to the box. We come up here to pray from the box. We come up here to pray to God, right? We come to worship God. We're not worshiping. I mean, we don't have a cross up here to worship a cross, right? We just recognize the symbol of the cross to point us to God, right? But that again, our worship and our connection to God is not physical, it's spiritual. Yes, we may bow to show humility. Yes, we may close our eyes Yes, we may speak with our physical vocal cords when we talk to God. However, the connection that we have with God is not just a connection of a physical connection. It's not just, although I love my Bible so much, and y'all know I don't want to lose my Bible. I don't want my Bible to be away from me. I love my Bible. But this isn't. Now, the words that speak to me through the Spirit that are in this book are how I connect to God. I do connect to God through His Word that's written here. But the physical book itself isn't my connection. Although, I like it. I like the book. And this particular copy I've held on to for a long time. Almost 18 years now. Actually, yeah, 18 years as of just last Sunday. But the physical isn't my connection. It is the spiritual. It is the words themselves that give that life, that breathe that spiritual life, that speak to me. And then when I speak to Him, now I might pray holding my Bible. I don't generally whisper to my Bible. Maybe sometimes it looks like it, but I'm talking to God. I'm not talking to any physical form. I'm speaking to God spiritually. Well, he goes on. We worship God in spirit and in truth. And so in spirit, and I'm going to try to breeze through this because we're over time. In spirit, as distinguished from a physical place or form, as we just discussed, and in truth, as distinguished from false conceptions resulting from imperfect knowledge. And again, there's a lot of verses here that you can refer to. In spirit, we've got John 4, verse 20 and 21, Acts 7, verse 48, and Acts 17, verse 24 and 25. And then in truth here, distinguishing from false conceptions resulting from imperfect knowledge. Again, we have John 4:22, that imperfect knowledge, right, that she had, that Christ tried to show her the perfect knowledge. And then John 17:17, 1 John 4:6, and Isaiah 8:20. So the last thing here on this, some difficulties explained, or actually, no, we're done with the difficulties. Now we're talking about, again, back to God is spirit. Other scriptures declaring God to be immaterial. Remember, not physical in that sense. God forbade idolatry on the basis that no man had seen Him. Neither was he. Neither was he anything material. And so remember in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 through 20, and then verse 23, he says, "Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire." Remember when God spoke to them from the top of the mountain. They didn't see any type of God, no similitude, nothing like anyone. And so, come on in. They didn't see that. He says, take heed lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure or likeness, or the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any, let's see here. Gotta get my eyes working here. A lot of words together. It's difficult for me. The likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the sea, or beneath the earth. Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the hosts of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them or serve them. He says, take heed lest this happen, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. He says, God's put this in place. Don't worship it. Says, but the Lord hath taken you and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day. Then he says, take heed unto yourselves. By the way, I'm just reading directly from what he quoted here. So he's got verses 15 through 20, and then I believe this is verse 23. Take heed unto yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make you a graven image, right? Take heed lest you make you a graven image, or the likeness of anything which the Lord thy God hath forbidden thee. Remember, he points out here that we need to take heed, or they needed to take heed, not to make a graven image, not to make something like God, because they didn't see anything like God, because they didn't see him, so there was nothing to make. And so again, on this, we've discussed two of the three points here, and that is that God is life, and that God is spirit. And then next week, Lord willing, we will jump in here and look at God is a person, as opposed to pantheism. Okay, let's pray.